Hello and welcome to Introduction to ArchViz with Quixel Bridge and Megascans. My name is Hrvoje. I'm a 3D artist from the architectural visualization company Polymachine, and I will be your host in the next 20-ish minutes where we will try to recreate the scene you're looking at on your screens right now. Traditionally, in ArchViz, creating or finding realistic textures and models can be quite problematic and tedious. That's why for the creation of this scene, we'll leverage the power of the Megascans library. As of now, the library contains more than 9,000 high-quality assets, be it 3D models or textures, and combined with the ease of use of Quixel Bridge, it can significantly speed up the path towards a finished project. The tools we're going to be using for this session are 3ds Max 2019, VRay Next, and the current version of Quixel Bridge. As you can see, the basic layout of our scene is truly nothing complex geometry-wise, just a collection of boxes and planes. We're using a standard 3ds Max physical camera, which is frozen, which is a great tip because otherwise it's very easy to move it by accident. The idea was to have kind of a mixed interior-exterior scene. We're doing a classic central perspective take with a ceiling window, which should give us some nice highlights on the side walls, and a relatively large window looking towards the courtyard. The very first thing we will be tackling is the light setup. I opted for a very simple setup using a VRay Sun and a default VRay Sky environment map. So after adding a VRay Sun to our scene, coming in from the left, we'll just accept the default Sky environment map, which would be then added for us, and we'll fire up the interactive preview. The black splotches you might see showing up in the frame buffer are just a result of the GPU denoising process. And the GPU denoiser is a great tool for very quickly previewing how the light works in your scenes. The main idea here was to get sort of like islands of sunlight coming through the beams in the courtyard and the windows, and getting this kind of stripy pattern on the floor. Now, I want this splash of sunlight to be very soft and subtle, so we'll do that by increasing the size multiplier of our VRay Sun object and making it quite large. Now, although this looks quite fine at the moment, once we start adding in various assets and materials to the scene, we can expect it to darken significantly because it will stop being all white. So, to get a more balanced light in the end and to get a bit more control over the overall light in the scene, we'll be creating some light portals at each of the individual windows. And once again, we're doing the most basic setup, which means we'll be placing a VRay light object at each individual window. Now, there's many ways to go about this, but for the purpose of this tutorial, I thought once again that just using the simplest method is probably the best. The contribution of these lights to the scene will become much more apparent once other assets and materials come in. But for now, I'm satisfied with this setup, and all that's left for us to do is to place another light portal on the ceiling window. Now, for this one specifically, we will want to increase the directionality parameter of the VRay light so that it kind of pushes lights more downwards instead of firing it equally in a 180-degree pattern. This in turn will give us a much nicer highlight on the back and side wall. With our light setup complete, I think this is a very pleasing result, so the next step for us will be to fire up Quixel Bridge and start importing assets and surfaces. But before doing the actual import stage, let's take a quick look at some of the many features available in Quixel Bridge. In case you're already familiar with all the functionalities within Quixel Bridge, feel free to skip ahead around 2.5 or 3 minutes at this point. So let's go through the features. In case you want to read the news about plugin or library updates, you can just click the little bell icon in the bridge window and you will see all the relevant news. Quixel provides a whole section of free Megascans, which I think is a great way to start exploring the Megascan ecosystem. The acquired section gives you an overview of all the assets which are in your personal account, while the downloaded section presents a subset of these assets which are present on your computer's hard drive. Now, if we scroll through the acquired section, we get the option to export any asset we already downloaded or to download assets that we haven't. Since we're now downloading these black hexagon tiles, you can see that the download process is actually automatic and happening in the background. So you can continue using the bridge as normal while your selected assets are being downloaded. The Quixel Bridge provides very nice ways of previewing the individual textures that make up a surface. So once you decide which kinds of assets and services you want to download, be sure to look at the Download Settings tab. Now, the Download Settings tab offers many options, the most important of which, besides the maximum texture resolution, is the material preset, where you get to pick which individual maps to download based on your DCC app of choice. The 3D preview mode, on the other hand, is a great way of looking at 3D scan models because it not only allows you to see and rotate the whole model before you import it in your chosen app, it also allows you to preview the individual LODs or levels of detail, which is of course very handy if you're developing anything for a real-time platform. Besides searching for assets by name or by category, Bridge also gives you a collections browser, which organizes individual assets into biomes and thematic or stylistic groups, which in turn makes it a breeze to select multiple assets which you can be sure will thematically fit each other. In case you don't have a multi-monitor setup, in the window menu you'll find a compact mode option which takes up much less screen space, and in combination with the always on top option found in the same menu, it will make it very easy to use the bridge in parallel with your DCC app once you're ready to start importing assets. The compact mode contains all the same information as the full window mode and will expand to show you a preview and all the important options once you select an asset. That being said, let's revert to the full window mode and get back to our scene. Now, before you start importing assets, there's a thing worth mentioning, and that's that any 3D models you import from the Quixel Bridge will get placed in the world origin. While preparing for this tutorial, I picked all of the Megascans I wanted to use and placed them in my favorites section, which is a great way to organize assets for easier access. So let's pick and export one of those. The Export Settings tab will allow you to choose the resolution, format, and LOD of your asset and select the app you want to export to. In our case, this will be 3ds Max. Now, before we export, we'll just make sure that our Megascans live link is on and set up to use our render engine of choice. The Apply Material to Selection button is on, and we will use that later while importing surfaces. But for now, let's just export this model. If you come back to Max at this point, you will see the user interface twitching a bit, which is normal and is just a side effect of the FBX format import process. As we wait for this to finish, you'll see your selected asset imported at the world origin. Let's just quickly separate the individual variants and shift our view a bit so that we can see everything better, and then we'll turn on our material editor. What I'm going to do is use the Get Material from Selected command, which I have bound to a keyboard shortcut for ease of use, and which is something I heartfeltly recommend you to do as well. Now, when we bring up the material, you'll see that a Quixel Bridge automatically created VRay materials for our objects, and also loaded all the necessary textures. We'll just quickly switch the diffuse map to visible in the viewport to see our objects better, and as you can see, everything is perfectly in order and the import process is complete. So let's import another model from the bridge. This time we'll be selecting another plant. This one has 5 different variants. And given that we're using the exact same settings as before, we can just click the export button and wait for the import process to finish. Once again, all the variants are located in the world origin, and we'll just quickly separate them. So while we're doing this, it would be a good time to mention that you'll notice Quixel Bridge creates materials which use VRay HDRI maps instead of the 3ds Max default bitmap texture. Now, unlike its name would suggest, the VRay HDRI texture is perfectly capable of handling regular bitmaps, but it's much better at handling images with greater bit depth than the 3ds Max standard bitmap texture is, so that's the reason why it's used here. You can tell just how automatic and effortless the whole import process is. So that being done, let's just move this to the side for later use and move on to importing surfaces from Quixel Bridge. Back when we started our Megascans live link, we had the option of apply material to selection turned on. And at this point, what's going to happen is that we're going to select an object, in this case our floor, and upon pressing the export button, these black hexagon tiles are going to get automatically applied to our floor object. If you look at the modifier stack of our floor, you'll see that a VRay displacement modifier appeared. This is because a lot of Megascan surfaces use displacement maps for added surface detail and realism. By default, the displacement map will be added to the material, but you can of course detach it from the material and drag it directly to the text map slot of the displacement modifier if you prefer to do so like I do. Now that this is done, let's quickly preview our scene and see if everything is okay with our newly added material. Now at this point, I'll just mention that it's a smart thing to turn off your VRay displacement modifiers when you're previewing, since displacement is a process that takes up a lot of memory and processing time. So in order to get your previews faster and not waste time, I recommend turning them off, especially so if you have a lot of objects in your scene that use displacement. But let's move on and import some more surfaces. So for our ceiling, we're going to pick these concrete slabs and export them after selecting our ceiling object. Now, since the surface is looking down, our shaded preview is going to be black, but we're just going to quickly switch to flat color to be able to better see it applied on our actual object. Everything seems okay, so let's move on to the walls. We're going to use the cast in situ concrete. And once again, we're constantly using the same settings, so it's 4K and JPEG. And the bridge automation enables us to use this to apply our surfaces with just a single press of the export button. Before we move on, we're just going to quickly select the floor material and apply it to the raised section of the floor, and also apply the wall material to the side walls. Coming back to the bridge and our favorite section, we'll be importing all of the objects and surfaces that we've pre-selected and applying them to various objects in the scene. We'll be skipping that part because it's just a repetition of the techniques we've used so far. But now with our objects placed and our surfaces applied, we can see that the image is starting to look much more like the end result we are working towards. However, if we look at our concrete walls, you can clearly see they have a distinct yellowish tint to them. And for this scene, I would like these walls to be gray. So we'll just quickly correct that by adding a color correction map in our diffuse slot and desaturating our diffuse map. We'll do a quick render region preview just to confirm that the end result is what we're looking for. Since our wall covers a relatively large portion of the image, I would like to break up this texture by adding an imperfection map. Luckily, the Megascans library actually contains a lot of different surface imperfections you can use to customize and add detail to your materials. We'll just add another UVW map to our wall object with a different mapping channel so that we can use different mapping for our surface textures and our imperfections. Coming back to the Quixel Bridge for a moment, you'll find an Open in Folder option, which is a great and very simple way of getting access to individual textures, which you can then just drag and drop into your material editor. And for this material, I'm just going to use one of these textures and composite it over our diffuse texture by using the VRay CompTex multiply mode. A great thing about these surface imperfections is that they do come in 8K resolution, and since this image is intended to be rendered in 6K for the final, this means we can effectively spread this surface map along the entire image without any tiling and not lose any of the detail in the process. So let's make another preview just to confirm that we're still on the right track. Now that everything seems to be shaping up nicely, we can tell that our floor is a bit too bright. The reason for this is we're looking at it from kind of a glancing angle and the sunlight is pretty strong outside. So we're just going to quickly correct this to get a bit more contrast and this nice dark look that these tiles have on the preview. We'll add another color correction node to our diffuse map chain, and by switching the lightness options to advanced, we're just going to lower the gamma value of our floor. This should result in a much more pleasing look for this specific scenario and light conditions. Now, while this does look nicer, it's still a bit too bright. If we lowered the brightness of the bitmap anymore, we'd start to lose detail. So in order to get everything a bit darker, we're just going to lower the reflections to compensate for the strong sunlight coming from outside. This seems to be doing the trick. So let's look at a bigger preview. And we're at a stage where we are getting very close to the intended result. At this point, all that's left for us to do is tweak. Tweaking materials, lights, and various tiny details is an integral part of any ArchViz image, and this one, of course, is no exception. But after applying a lot of different tiny tweaks and subtle changes, let's import a sofa to fill up this space that we have created. Our sofa is missing a material, and we'll correct that by, again, coming back to the Quixel Bridge and selecting one of the many available fabric surfaces and exporting it into 3ds Max and applying it to our sofa. Once the export process completes, we'll come back to Max to check how our material looks on our sofa. And from what we can see right here, the mapping is a bit too big. Now, the absolute easiest way to fix this at this point is to add a UV Xform modifier and simply increase the tiling. Now, be sure to click the Apply to Entire Object if your object has multiple elements inside the mesh. Now, let's just take a quick look at how by iterating through this process we can add some tables, some apples, and, well, a deer to finish up our composition and our image. And that should be it. As you saw, the scene went from a set of basic planes and boxes to a photorealistic environment with the use of Quixel Bridge and the Megascans library. And thanks to the bridge, I was also able to prototype a few ideas with this scene very quickly along the way. This following image contains a set of ideas that we ran through over the course of this tutorial's production, and being able to quickly experiment with the ideas I had in mind at the time was truly a game changer. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.